Good Tuesday morning, friends. It's a beautiful day in Las Vegas, and this is, of course, our Tuesday tune-up. I want to tell you about a time that my wife and I took a trip to New York, and we went to visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which was a wonderful experience. And I found that among its world-class collection of statues, paintings, and design is a very large collection of armor from around the world. And I was particularly fascinated by the way that each culture makes use of the materials they have around them to fashion armor. It seems that whatever culture you explore, each has a type of armor that they've developed to aid them in war. Now, I gotta say, I've always assumed that armor was armor. Logical assumption. We tend to think of that medieval English knight in his suit of armor. But I learned that there are many different types and different uses for armor. For instance, did you know that some of the suits of armor have interchangeable parts? It seems that you need a different configuration for jousting than you do for battle, and so they have many different combinations of helmets and gloves and breastplates, and they're all designed to be swapped out to fit the particular needs. As I think about it, that's much like my first suit in the 1970s that came with a jacket, a vest, 2 pairs of pants, and 2 belts. A bold fashion choice, to be sure, but hey, at least it wasn't a leisure suit. All right, full disclosure, I did have a couple of those too. Be that as it may, Paul tells us that in his letter that we need to put on the whole armor of God. Now, I'd always taken that at face value, thinking that Paul was encouraging us to gird ourselves up for battle. But listen further. He says, our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against rulers, against authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Well, that certainly makes one think of a looming battle, and it's one that we have to win at all costs, right? Taken from that perspective, it certainly seems good advice to put on our armor and prepare for battle. Much like the Crusaders, we're being called to slay our enemies in the name of God. At least at first reading, that seems to be what Paul's saying, but my friends, that's not actually the case. Our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh. Paul is explicit in saying that we're not engaged in a battle with other people. We're not called to do battle with people and smite them down like some Old Testament story. But you say, okay, Rick, but if we're not going to attack, then why are we wearing this armor? Good question. As I said, much of our image of armor comes from the days of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. But think for a moment. Can you envision any modern day armor? Well, think for a minute about a firefighter who wears boots, a protective coat, and a strong helmet. That's armor. How about an astronaut wearing a spacesuit, a helmet, and gloves? That too is armor. I know a guy who loves to ride motorcycles, and he taught me the phrase ATGAT, which stands for all the gear, all the time. Helmet, gloves, leather jacket, that too is armor. You see, armor doesn't need to be for offense. It's really about defense, to protect the wearer from a hostile environment. So Paul's not telling us to gird ourselves in armor so that we can attack. He's encouraging us to put on the armor of God in order that we might protect ourselves. The firefighter, the astronaut, the motorcyclist, they wear their armor not for offense, but to protect them from harm in a harsh environment. So too then, we are called to put on the armor of God, not to attack, but to protect us from harm. What Paul is telling us to do really is to put on our armor so that, I love those 2 words, so that we may go out into the world. Go out and bring God's light into the darkness of a hurting world. Listen further. He says, fasten the belt of truth around your waist and put on the breastplate of righteousness. As shoes for your feet, put on whatever will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of peace. With all of these, take the shield of faith, take the helmet of salvation, and take the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Truth, righteousness, gospel, peace, salvation. Those don't sound like weapons to me. Do they sound like weapons to you? Yeah, I didn't think so. They sound more like tools of love. For that is why we are called into the sometimes inhospitable world. Not to force others into our way of thinking with weapons, rather to demonstrate God's love for all people. My friends, we are called to be living examples of love to one another. Now, the medieval knights lived in castles with moats and high walls that protected them from harm, and safe behind these castle walls, there wasn't any need for armor. It was only when they went out into the world that their armor was needed. When we're in the church, we should likewise have no need of armor, for this too is a safe place, or at least it should be. There are many instances of people being hurt by the church, sadly, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. But at its best, the church should be a safe place, and that's what we strive to build. Unlike a castle, though, which is built to keep people out, the church should be open to all. We should be building a church home not just for ourselves, but for all people. For God's love, my friends, is for each of us, and his church should be as well. So as we put on our gospel armor and go out into the world, one of our aims should be to invite people back with us into God's church. That's part of our mission, part of our call to share the gospel. Now, if this sounds perilously close to evangelism, I assure you, it's not accidental. It's a scary proposition for some. I know. I understand. Talking about faith it's challenging. It's off-putting. You have to open yourself up a bit to the other person, and that has the unfortunate consequence of making you vulnerable. What if they say no? What if they get mad at me? For most of us, this is uncharted and potentially hostile territory. But if that worries you, listen to St. Paul. Take with you the gospel armor to protect you, knowing that God is with you every step of the way, and knowing, my friends, that you're not going at it alone. God bless.